Welcome to How to Play Horus Heresy 3rd Edition. In this video, we are going to be looking into the Reserves subphase. The Reserve subphase is the first part of the movement phase and comes immediately before the Move subphase. This subphase allows you to deploy units onto the table that you've held back from your main deployment at the start of the game. It covers units entering via reserves, deep strike, and aerial reserves. Note that when discussing reserves, the use of the word reserves only refers to units entering play via reserves or deep strike. It does not cover units that are part of aerial reserves. Any rule that affects aerial reserves will use that terminology specifically. For example, a command vox relay is used specifically to make reserves tests easier and more consistent, not aerial reserves. This was clarified via an FAQ available via Warcom. This video will only cover regular reserves and will cover aerial reserves and flyers in general in a separate video. Some missions will allow the player to use reserves. This means that the player can select units from their army and put them in reserve. When a unit is in reserve, it is not deployed with the rest of the army at the start of the game and instead will enter play after the game has started. This is great for protecting key units, adding power to a part of the table that is lacking after seeing your opponent's deployment, getting the drop on enemies in later turns, and also getting key units into positions via deep strike. It does come with some risks though, as a test is needed to bring the unit onto the table and cannot always be guaranteed to happen when you want it. Any unit can be put into reserve. To do this, select your unit or units that you want to be in reserve and place them to one side, not on the table. Transport vehicles can be put into reserve also, and can have units embarked within them. Although the unit inside is also technically in reserve, when testing you will do so against the actual transport vehicle. Some units, like drop pods, must start the game in reserves. If this is the case, then the unit's profile will state so. When this subphase happens in your turn, you will do the following. First, you will perform a reserves test for every unit you hold in reserves. Every unit must be tested before any units can be put onto the table. You can do this from your first turn, except for units that enter via deep strike, which must be tested from turn 2 onwards. To perform a reserves test, roll a d6 for the unit. On a roll or 3 or more, the test is passed and the unit is eligible to enter play from reserves. If it is a 1 or a 2, then the test is failed and the unit will remain in reserve until the next turn, when you will test for it again. Once all units in reserves have had a reserves test, all the successful units can be placed onto the table. Note that just because a unit has passed its reserves test does not mean you must put it on the table. You can choose to leave it in reserve until a later turn in order to not bring your units in piecemeal. The unit will have to pass another reserve test however in the following turn. To bring a unit on from reserve, the player will choose a point on the edge of the table that is within their own deployment zone. This can be the long or short edges and can be at the very edge of the deployment zone also. Most units cannot enter play outside the deployment zone, but if they can, this will be highlighted in their special rules. First, a model from the unit is placed at this point. The player then moves that unit in line with all the rules covered in the Move subphase. Models can rush out of reserves, and anti-grav can fly over terrain. Note that a model or unit coming out of reserves always counts as moving, so do not feel the need to keep your model in place to try and benefit from the stationary rule. As with normal movement, you must end the model's movement at least 1 inch away from an enemy model or a friendly model locked in combat. Terrain also affects the movement. Once the model is placed, the player will then do the same with all subsequent models in that unit, until the entire unit is in place and maintains coherency. If coherency cannot be maintained, then any offending models are immediately removed as casualties. After that, the player will then move on to the next unit they want to bring out of reserves. Also note that as this is the reserves subphase, reactions that are part of the move subphase cannot be used against this movement. Units embarked in transport vehicles remain within the vehicle at this point and don't need to do any further movement in the reserve subphase. models that enter play from reserves count as moving, and cannot make any further moves in the following move subphase. However, they can shoot and assault as normal, providing they did not rush. Some units have the Outflank special rule. This means that they can enter play from any battlefield edge that is not in the enemy's deployment zone, or within 7 inches of an enemy model. If they do so, they cannot assault in that same turn. If they are a transport vehicle, then the unit within also cannot assault, but can disembark and shoot normally. This is excellent for setting up ambushes or reinforcing weak points in your army. Finally, some units can deploy reserves via Deep Strike. This represents a unit falling onto the battlefield from orbit, leaping from a passing flyer, or even teleporting onto the field using ancient advanced technology. A unit must have the Deep Strike rule, and if they do deploy from Deep Strike, then they can only do so from turn 2 onwards. Only one unit can attempt to Deep Strike per turn, but can occur alongside regular reserves. If the Deep Strike reserve test is failed, it still counts as an attempt. To test for Deep Strike, roll a d6. On a roll of 3 or more, the test is passed and the unit is eligible to enter play from reserves. If it is a 1 or a 2, then the test is failed and the unit will remain in reserve until the next turn, when they will have to test again. To deploy via Deep Strike, place a model from the unit anywhere on the battlefield. This must be at least 1 inch away from enemy models, any battlefield edge, or any impassable terrain. Once this first model is placed, then all subsequent models in the unit should be placed in unit coherency with the first model, but no more than 6 inches away from it. If for any reason coherency cannot be maintained, or a model falls out with the 6 inches, then the offending models are immediately removed as casualties. Deep striking models cannot move in the subsequent move phase, and they cannot charge or assault. However, are free to act normally in the shooting phase. Remember, the unit counts as moving as it has entered play from reserves. Some deep striking units such as drop pods are also transport vehicles. Units within can exit the vehicle normally in the subsequent move subphase and make shooting attacks normally, but cannot assault or charge. Although movement reactions cannot be triggered in this subphase, enemy units can choose to use the Intercept reaction. This reaction allows the enemy to shoot at the unit entering play, normally using snapshots. Multiple enemy units can intercept the same unit. Enemies must have line of sight on the model entering play. Be mindful of where you choose to bring your reserves in from. Currently, the rules seem to suggest that a unit can remain in reserves indefinitely if you fail a reserve test every turn. Hopefully this will get FAQ'd in the future. If you guys know if this isn't correct, please let me know where in the rulebook I can find this. And that is the basics of the reserves phase. Any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.